Today, our Holy Week journey begins in the most fitting way, with a day and service punctuated by contrast and contradiction. What many of my priest colleagues call liturgical whiplash. A roller coaster ride that begins with a high, then plunges us down into the depths, but with a momentum that carries us into the rest of the week. An important contrast unfolds in how we go through the story. The whole thing feels completely strange. To mark this day with joy and then sadness. To read the Passion on Palm Sunday when Good Friday is still a few days away, and the story will be read once more. It's a strange and conflicting sequence of great celebration and sadness, of contrast and contradiction, but that's the whole point. In Holy Week, we enter the story of Jesus, not as spectators, but as participants. And we begin today by first participating as those celebrating Jesus' triumph. As many of us stood together outside in the courtyard, we entered into the story by holding palm branches, just like those who were there with Jesus, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." Processing into the church like Jesus and the disciples processed on their way to Jerusalem. And then we enter the events that follow, not by hearing the story of Jesus' death, but by being a part of it. As those who turned away from Jesus, as those who betrayed Jesus, as those who nailed Jesus to the cross. Where on Good Friday we enter the story as those who grieve Jesus' death and weep over the cross. Today, we scandalously enter the story as those responsible. It is not others who we hear, but it is us who say, "Crucify him." It's a stark contrast, an emotional roller coaster, an uncomfortable shift, and it should be. Rarely does someone want to be the bad guy, especially when we can so easily point the finger at somebody else, just like Pilate did, passing the buck, pointing the finger at others. "I won't have anything to do with this." And indeed, like so many Christians have done throughout history, pointing the finger at others, pointing the finger at the Jewish people to say, "They did it. They killed Jesus. We didn't do it." But lest we think that some other people were responsible for Jesus' death, the Jewish crowds, the chief priests, the Roman authorities, today we own the fact that it was not some other entity, not some other group. It was people, just like us, who did it. People that were afraid that the disruptive figure that was in front of them would threaten their power, disrupt their comfort, and upend the status quo. In this case, to point a finger at another is really to point the finger at a mirror and see the finger pointing right back at us. It forces us to own the fact that these characters, all these characters that we just heard, that we just read, are within us. To own the fact that we have just as much capacity to be the perpetrators as the grievers. To own the fact that we are just as capable of shouting, "Hosanna in the highest heaven" with Jesus as we are to turn against Jesus and kill him. To own the fact that the conflicting emotion of this day is also a reflection of the kind of conflict that is within us. To own the fact that we are complicit. Not because we should wallow in brokenness, but because in owning up to these things and those capacities within us, we own the fact that by his death, Jesus died for us just as Jesus died for them. Because Jesus died for sinners, and sinners are we all. So today, we necessarily rejoice, and we are necessarily humbled. And as we continue in the roller coaster that is Holy Week, we begin today with that high, and then we go forth with this deep plunge, but a plunge that propels us into the rest of the week, into the rest of the story. A week in which we step back and we enter this great story from another point of view, to witness and experience that while we are not so unlike those who killed Jesus, that Jesus did it for us, so that with Jesus we reach the joy of Easter. So as you make plans for your week ahead, as Katie and I sometimes do on Sunday nights, we look ahead and plan our calendars out for the week. As you make your plans, I appeal to you to come back. Because the roller coaster is just beginning. Yes, of all the days to be here, if you have to pick just one, Easter is that ultimate celebration. But to be here today or on Easter only is to miss the rest of the ride. To feel the twists and turns, the ups and the downs, the full scope of what is happening and what all of it means for us. As a musician, I like to make comparisons to music, and in this case, for me, it's like the final triumphant cadence of a great piece of music. What makes the last chord so satisfying is not just the chord itself, but the progression that leads you into it. The whole musical journey that brings you all the way to the end. If you don't believe me, you can just play the final chord of a piece of music. It's a little different than hearing everything that comes up and brings you to it. And in the case of Easter, the celebration of the resurrection, you can't have resurrection to new life without death to old life. And the depth of the love that brought it all to pass. The Triduum, as it's called, which begins with Maundy Thursday, where we enter the story as Jesus demonstrates to us his love in washing his disciples' feet and commanding us to do the same, and instituting the Holy Eucharist, the divine feast in which we are united with him forever. On Good Friday, when we walk the stations of the cross through Airlie Gardens, walking as if with Jesus and recounting each step along the way. In the liturgy of the day, we again hear the story of Jesus' death, but in a different light, and perspective. This time from John's Gospel. This time beholding in awe what Jesus endured and did for us. At the great vigil of Easter, when from out of darkness the new fire of Easter is kindled right outside of these doors and spread to each person as a beacon of hope. And in that dark church, this church, with flickers of light, we wait, and in waiting, we listen to how God has acted to save God's people in history. We recite our own baptismal covenant once more. And then with all the lights lit bright, we sing and celebrate that, yes, he is risen. And of course, on Easter Day, on that glorious morning, we rise ourselves to celebrate the resurrection which vanquished the grip of sin and death and opened to us the way of everlasting life. But it begins here today. So as we begin and as we prepare for this most holy of weeks, you and I do so now, necessarily humbled, acknowledging that while we were not there ourselves, the same sinful trappings that led people to kill Jesus are within us. That it was humanity corrupted by sin that killed Jesus. But, as we'll see again throughout the week ahead, it was this very humanity corrupted by sin that Jesus came to save and for whom he died. Even them, even you, even me. So don't stop now. Stay along for the ride.